Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining today's Dision webinar, Companies Embracing Remote Working. I'm Kayla Kirkby. I'm the head of marketing here at Dision, and we're really appreciative that everyone has taken a few minutes out of their day to hear what we believe is a really, really strong panel on an incredibly hot topic within our space, and that's remote working and virtual solutions. Dision is a virtual desktop infrastructure provider. We work with a myriad of different companies across various industries, but one thing that we continue to see popping up is remote working, whether companies are running established programs or perhaps looking to get remote working and a virtual workforce up off the ground. It's something that we're definitely seeing a shift around and a trend that is moving in an upward direction. So today we're bringing together some industry experts to tell us a bit more about their hands-on experience. So let's dive in. In terms of our agenda today, I want to just cover a few items to get things kicked off here. Everyone who's on today's webinar from an attendee perspective will be muted. We will have an interactive Q&A session at the end of today's webinar, so encourage you to use the chat function to the right-hand side of your console to submit any questions that you think of during the broadcast. We'll collect those and then facilitate that Q&A with today's panelists. And if you've got colleagues or maybe you're not able to stay on for the entire presentation today, a recording will be shared. So rest in mind that if you're not able to stay with us for the entirety of the webinar, if you've got folks that would really benefit from today's content, you will be able to share that, and we'll be sending that out after the fact. So today we're going to hear from three industry experts representing Concentrix, Hyatt International, and itelBPO, and they're going to tackle some of the most common challenges that we hear in terms of remote working programs, and those include the onboarding and provisioning of new staff members, security, and then visibility. And again, we will wrap up with that Q&A at the end. Today we've got Manny Lattis, who's a co-founder and the VP of Business Development here at Dision. Manny obviously has been with our organization since the very beginning and has dealt with several customers, prospects, partners who are, well embedded in the remote working space and has I think probably seen just about everything. So Manny, I'm going to pass the baton to you to get things kicked off here today.
Great, thanks Kayla, and really excited to walk through this webinar together. We have a great panel put together. Really appreciate them taking the time to share their thoughts and best practices. We have some industry veterans with decades of experience to draw upon. And what I like about this panel that we've put together is they're different perspectives. No one size fits all, how to best optimize a remote workforce. So I'd say let's get started. So I'm going to introduce the speakers. We first off have Doug Barry. Doug's the Senior Director, Global Work at Home at Concentrix. He oversees all aspects of remote working. He's been involved with managing remote workers for over 10 years in various roles. Also have Chris Worth. Chris is the Director of Guest Services for Hyatt's Global Contact Center. Having more than 12 years experience running remote working programs, Chris is currently responsible for multiple levels of Hyatt's guest services, which includes in-house and remote support teams. He's been with Hyatt for 27 years and brings an interesting perspective to remote working, having started in the IT side of the house. And last, we have Felix Serrano. Felix is the CEO of the Americas for itelBPO. Felix has been in the contact center industry for more than 15 years, and he's been running remote programs since 2001. At itelBPO, Felix is responsible for physical contact centers, remote workforce, and handle everything from revenue creation to shareholder outcomes. Really excited to get started. So, Doug, could I pass it over to you? Introduce yourself as well as a little bit about the Concentrix program.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Manny. Hi, I'm Doug Barry. So, Concentrix is a global business services company. We provide services to over 400 companies around the world today, and we've been using work at home since 2004. We actually leverage, I know this slide says 1,000 people, but we actually have several thousand people in our work at home model across multiple countries in both North America as well as Europe. And what that really allows us to do is to go out and get the best talent to serve our clients. So I'm very excited to be here today, Manny. Thanks for inviting me, and I look forward to the panel discussion.
Great, thanks a lot, Doug. Next, I'm going to pass it over to Chris. Chris, introduction of your program you're running at Hyatt.
Great, thanks, Manny. Hi, everybody. Chris Worth, Director of Guest Services for Hyatt. If you don't know what we do, obviously we're a hospitality industry, and we have hotels across the globe. I am mainly responsible for our North America Global Contact Center. We do take calls from all over the world. We handle calls from the other side of the world during the hours of operations where they're closed, and they do similar. We dove into the work from home program really in 2011. We dabbled in it a little bit prior to that with some local associates here in Omaha, Nebraska, which is where our center is located. And then we went on a pretty rapidly scaled deployment to increase by 4 times the number of remote workers we had in 2015. The core job that our remote agents do is inbound sales and customer care. Customer care being everything from every channel, so social, whether it's over the phone, via email, we handle all of and support that for the entire company. And we currently have remote agents in 21 states across the U.S. that are all managed locally out of the Global Contact Center in Omaha, Nebraska. Thanks for the opportunity. Glad to be here, and looking forward to answering questions later. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Chris, and looking forward to getting your perspective in a bit. I'm going to turn it over to Felix, if you wouldn't mind a little about yourself, Felix, and your remote program at ITEL.
Great. First and foremost, thanks for having me. Felix Serrano. I represent itelBPO Smart Solutions. As noted in the introduction, I've been in the industry for about 25 years, but about 17 specifically in the virtual agent space. We operate multiple models of virtual agent solutions, from the most pure, fully virtual solution in the US with all processes virtually enabled, total cloud infrastructure, to more hybrid solutions where we've continued to expand outside of the US as well. And so we have a position that says we're able to support highly specialized industries with premium quality professionals domestically, and we're able to do so in very complementary fashion outside of the US as well. And we have a firm belief that this is one of the largest growing models worldwide, because it enables brands to find like-minded customers to support their brand and their reputation. So looking forward to the rest of the session. And I think what I would ask everyone to keep in mind, as Manny indicated, is there's no one perfect virtual solution. There are many solutions across a continuum, and I think today you're going to hear a lot of those variations.
Great, thanks, Felix. All right, so let's get into the meat of the meeting here. So, onboarding, provisioning of remote workers. We understand, how this is a necessary evil, and we hear everything that can take 3 to 4 weeks for IT to get devices and equipment out to remote employees. Getting them stood up. We've had stories of companies spending $100,000 a month in both shipping devices out as well as getting them back. Another story was companies would ship devices out and get a total of 10% back once an agent or employee took another position. So you understand the cost. And as you add and sprinkle on seasonality, it even gets harder. Dision's partnered with the iGel, which is a manufacturer of thin clients, and can support a BYOD model, which is allowing companies to rapidly scale agents and scale down without having to go through all the shipping. So Doug, I'm going to pass this over to you. If you could give us your perspective of how you are addressing this item today.
Yep, great. Thanks, Manny. So at Concentrix, we're a little bit unique in that we operate in both a BYOD model, but we also, for certain clients that have very unique and specialized hardware requirements, we do provide hardware to some people. And so we certainly have the challenges, like you talked about, with hardware setup and logistics challenges and collection efforts and all those sort of things that go along with managing the logistics, as well as remote support and remote patching and remote management of those devices as well. Our standard model is really for us to provide a BYOD, but we have that flexibility for specialized clients to give them the hardware option as well. And so while this slide sort of talks, Manny, about the hardware side, I did want to mention that when it comes to onboarding and provisioning, it's not just the technology. It goes much deeper than that. So one of the things that we focus heavily on is how we onboard our people, processing paperwork and coordination of all those processes that have to work seamlessly between our operations team, our HR team, and our IT team to make sure that people coming on board very easily, but also for offboarding as well, that we can make sure that we meet all the things that we have to do from a compliance standpoint, and make it a very smooth process for our workers.
Great, thanks, Doug. Appreciate your perspective. Felix, I know you've got a lot of experience in this space as well. Would you mind giving your perspective on this?
Sure. I mean, it's really been great to see the evolution in the industry from a technology perspective and the various models that have been deployed, sort of specifically referring to virtual agents. You know, the underlying technology that we use today continues to get better and better every year, and it's really allowed you know, virtual agent providers such as ITEL to really react faster to customer needs. So you know, we operate, I think, as I alluded to, we sort of operate one of the pure forms of virtual agent solutions, whereby everything is virtual, you know, training, facilitation, management, technology. And as part of that, or as an enabling tool, we leverage a lot of cloud-based infrastructure. And what that really means to the audience is that from the time a client needs us to spin up capacity, and our ability to do so is a fraction of the time that, you know, a number of years ago it took other virtual providers, but also physical-based centers. So we're able to turn up capacity faster. We're able to find agents that have hardware that in almost every case exceeds that which we deploy in our own physical centers, because the rate of change in the industry from a technology perspective is so rapid that you know, the devices that people have in their homes, you know, continue to be better and better with every year that passes, and often that level of refresh that they have far exceeds what sort of a traditional physical-based, you know, provider is able to refresh their hardware at. So we look at it from a technical perspective as well, in that we can spin up faster, more cost-effectively, more efficiently. But then also there's the non-technical side, and by that I mean, and as my colleague alluded to, it's the ability to bring people on board in a more seamless fashion. You know, what we really find is that in a true virtual environment, the ability to collapse processes and run them in parallel allows you to sort of meet the demands of customers that much faster. So from the moment in which you are interviewing via video, submitting your application, printing out the documentation that you need, or submitting the information that you need from an I-9 perspective, all cloud-based. In our environment, those don't really touch hands. And so you're able to move at such a speed and with such an efficient process that, you know, processes that in the past took you multiple days because you had mail and people touching them, you know, for us really has become a huge area of differentiation. And so we look at the onboarding and provisioning as something that's just going to continue to get more efficient as the years pass. And what I would say is often, or at least in our business, the remote processes that are allowing us to be successful in the virtual environment are actually creating, you know, significant efficiencies even in our physical premise-based operations as well. So there is a cross-pollination of those practices that work really well, that create a almost a more efficient model across the board, whether you're in virtual or in physical.
Thanks for the perspective, Felix. One follow-up question on that. I know you're moving, your business is moving to a lot of cloud SaaS-based applications, and from a remote standpoint, quality internet is very important. How do you guys handle that? How do you address that? What are you experiencing? Is that something that you're providing to your agents, they're bringing to the table, and just your experience there?
Internet penetration is at such an all-time high. Speeds are continuing to get better and better at more affordable rates. The consistency and quality of the residential grade is so good these days that our target population largely already has the speeds that are required. And so we don't provide internet, but what we do is extensive testing up front to make sure that you meet our requirements. And then as an add-on to that, we have monitoring that occurs right down to the endpoint. So, if anyone's ever been in a physical location and you're sitting in a command center and you're watching what's going on in real time, we effectively have something that's very similar that allows us, that through a series of alerts allows us to know when someone's bandwidth has degraded, and that may cause packet drops, which sounds like jitter on the line. And that could be for a number of reasons. It could be because someone came home and decided to turn on a PlayStation or stream something on Netflix. We won't be able to know what application caused it, but we'll be able to know that there's a degradation in quality that may be impacting us, and we can act very quickly to remedy that. I think one final item is software has become, especially in video and in voice, has become so advanced that compression rates allow us to do that much more with even less bandwidth. And so, there were times in which you required, 20 up, 10 down, or something like that. Now we're able to work with even slower bandwidths and provide, really phenomenal quality voice and voice interaction.
Great, thanks. We're seeing the similar trends on our side, so thanks for sharing. So let's move on to the next challenge, which is security. And we're, reading about this in the paper and new compliance, PCI, HIPAA, and GDPR, which is recent, and who knows what's around the corner next. Companies have solved it in their brick and mortar facilities, and as you extend out to the work at home, moves the needle out to the home. I'd love to get everyone's perspective. Chris, I'm going to start with you. Since you've been running, brick and mortar, you also come from the IT side. Love to get your perspective of security and compliance from your work at home.
Sure, thanks, Manny. So a little bit of difference between the brick and mortar side and the work from home. Let's start with from a high-level security perspective. Our work from home agents are required to go through a multi-factor authentication process, utilizing basically either their home phone or a iPad device or phone device that they can load an application on. So before they can get into our network, they need to validate through those devices, which is something we don't have to do with our brick and mortar site associates, but we do require from our work from home agents. We're also, I know, a little different than my colleagues from how what we provide versus not provide. We provide a thin client and IP phone to all of our remote associates as their way to receive phone calls and get into our network. So because of that, we can set up specific profiles and things for them within our internal environment to make sure that they're following through the appropriate security protocols. From a PCI perspective, what we've just recently started 2 months ago was our associates no longer take credit card information from our customers over the phone. Being a transactional process in our reservation flow, that was something that has been the norm for years, but has become a security concern most recently with how much fraud and credit card theft and things that are going on. So the way that we tackled that was to at the end of our transaction process or our booking process, we advise the guest that they're going to be transferred into our automated system, where the credit card is then collected through that process, and then applied to the reservation automatically. So we are no longer in the game of taking credit card numbers over the phone from an associate. An associate taking credit card numbers from a guest over the phone. So those are a few things that we're doing from a security standpoint.
Great, thanks for that. One thing I have a follow-on for you, Chris. One recent conference I was at, one of the data points was that there was actually less fraud from remote agents than there were at brick and mortar, and there's a lot of factors that go to that. Do you guys take a different approach to security or compliance based on your captive or brick and mortar centers versus remote?
I think a little bit about that statement, Manny, is the reason why we decided for the credit card process to be the same, whether it's remote or brick and mortar. So it's not only our remote workers that are not taking cards, it's all associates that are not taking cards.
Great, thanks for your sharing that experience.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
So I'm going to go over back to Felix, and I'd love to get your perspective since you are, as a BPO, handling companies like Hyatt and others, and you're having to meet or exceed their security requirements and compliance requirements. I'd love to get your perspective of how you're solving that, especially for multiple customers in multiple industries.
Sure. The topic around security has long sort of plagued the virtual agent environment. In fact, I think you could lead, borrowing a term from a colleague in the industry, with a myth buster, which is, and there is in fact there's almost no data to support that at home is less secure, less safe, higher fraud. That is sort of one of those, to borrow from a modern day term, that's sort of fake news. In that there's just nothing behind it. I just think that was probably someone around the table that said, if I can't see the person, it must be a less safe environment. And so much of what has been created from a security and compliance perspective in the industry is in an attempt to overcome a perception that is not necessarily backed by fact. Nonetheless, what I think that's really done is it's almost made the offering that much more secure than its traditional physical center counterpart. And so, from our perspective, what I've seen in the industry and what we do is, we do the many multiple layers of authentication to ensure that, the John who we hired is John who is, coming to work every day, and that they're not sort of in the background with third-party devices trying to capture, sensitive information. If I digress a moment, I'll tell you that, anyone that's been in the industry for a good period of time knows that the number one deterrent from a security perspective is the fact that who you hire in a virtual environment from a maturity perspective and a professional experience perspective tends to be night and day different than who you would traditionally hire in a physical center, where in a physical center, it's predominantly a millennial, not always, but I think the trend suggests that the type of candidate that you generally have in a work at home environment tends to be sort of in their mid 30s and above. So very different maturity levels. But from a security perspective, technical wise, multiple layers of authentication so that we force you to authenticate on multiple devices using only information that you would have. I think outside of that, and predominantly in response to two things, both security and to create a more human connection, we leverage video as a core offering at almost every level. So with ITEL, you interview via video, you're hired via video, your training is via video, your day-to-day interaction with your ops management is, and so is our compliance, in that we can see what goes on in your physical environment unannounced during periods when you're scheduled to work. So we have a fairly comprehensive process by which when you come to work, you have to be appropriately dressed and in the right environment. And during that period, we make sure that you have a clean desk policy, no differently than you would in a physical center when you walk by someone's desk and you see that they don't have a phone or a piece of paper. So we look at it in, we've taken a very sort of modern day approach with respect to security. And we've quite simply said, if seeing people equals you feeling more secure, then great, we're going to enable that. And in fact, knock on wood, we see very, very low, almost in some cases, no incidents of fraud based on what I've said.
Great, thanks. I know we could spend the entire webinar on this topic, but let's maybe we'll do a follow-up at some point, but let's move on to the next. Visibility, and the comments that I hear in the market are, I know what my agents or my employees are doing in my building. You know, they could raise their hand. I can come over and see what they're experiencing real time. I know how productive or unproductive they are. I can help troubleshoot. I can engage IT. When you move that agent to home, all of that goes away. You know, how do I know what they're doing? What are they seeing? What are they experiencing? At the same conference I was at, and a lot of us were at, we heard that 80% of the agents' issues, remote agent issues, are actual training or user error. And a lot of times they'll have to engage IT. Sometimes the agent will have to bundle all their equipment, drive in, sit with IT, drive back out. That can be an 8-hour day, costing the business a lot of money to pay that employee, and also not generate the revenue, taking reservations or sales or whatnot. So I'd love to get everyone's perspective. Dision is also providing a visibility analytics tool, which provides real-time analytics into the desktop, network performance, as well as remote shadowing. So trying to solve it in different ways. Doug, I'd love to hand it over to you to talk about your experience around work at home and how providing that visibility to your agents, as well as training and coaching.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to approach it from, Manny, a couple of different ways. And so one of the most important aspects of driving performance and managing security compliance is to have that visibility into the home environment. So from the worker side, the home worker needs to have that lifeline for support and assistance and coaching and development. We often use chat tools for that, so they can, have assistance from subject matter experts or maybe their manager, or get assistance from specialized teams. But we also heavily leverage video, and we're actually face-to-face with our worker very, very frequently for our coachings, our team meetings, one-on-one meetings. If IT needs to be able to look into your machine, if you're having some technical issue, we have the ability to be on video and to take over that machine and actually see what's on the screen. So the technology has really advanced in the last 10 years that I've been doing this to really ease this sort of side of the management of the home worker. From our standpoint, from a managerial standpoint, we ensure that we have that visibility into what the home worker is doing. We can monitor their screens remotely, silently. We can monitor their internet activity and traffic. We can look at their bandwidth usage and make sure that they're not going to have some technical issues due to networking concerns. We monitor their calls and their transactions, and we have the ability, and do this very frequently as part of our agreement with our employees, is that we will turn on their monitors and we will be able to do a desk audit very quickly to make sure that they're compliant with our clean desk policy and things like that. So we have that built, that lifeline to give us the visibility into the home environment that's built right into our processes every day.
Great, thanks, Doug. Follow-up question for you, since I know you are a global company and have agents across North America, Europe, and elsewhere. Do you find, can you share any best practices or challenges that you've had crossing multiple time zones, language barriers, things like that?
No, I don't think, from a time zone perspective, we are a 7x24 business. So our people come into the company knowing generally the shifts are going to work and where they're going to be. We screen very heavily into language barriers, and we want to make sure that we minimize that, but we also celebrate the diversity of our people. So it's not, we don't want everyone to exactly sound alike. So we have, people in lots of countries, and so that's, it's part of who we are. But so those issues specifically, Manny, don't give us any particular concerns.
Great, thanks. Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you a little bit about the visibility and how you guys are handling it at Hyatt.
Yeah, thanks, Manny. this is quite honestly something that we struggled with starting off, and the reason for that is this idea of you have a culture and an environment that you create inside of your brick and mortar, and part of transferring that to your remote workers is this idea of visibility and relationship building. And we have yet to go down the route of using video or webcams, and I'll just have to say I'm a little jealous because we're ready, but just not there yet. Although sometimes I get a little concerned about what we may see if we just pop in on them sometimes. So what we've done is we've used primarily chat or chat rooms for specific topics where they can jump in and out of, but also one ongoing that is for the smaller service communities or teams that they use as a way to just socialize, ask questions, get peer-to-peer feedback. And then from a training and coaching perspective, we have direct calls with those associates from the leader to the associate, but also group coachings as well, where we bring certain individuals that may be struggling in a similar area together and really do some brainstorming and tackling of topics. I will say we can be a lot better at it, and it's something that we're continuing to improve on. But we've been fairly successful without having to go down the route of video yet, but that is definitely something that we're going to be using in the future.
Great, thanks. Chris, question from the supervisor to agent or associate. Does it differ in your brick and mortar versus at home? And if you wouldn't mind, even if you have those numbers, if you wanted to share those, the ratio?
Sure, yeah, you bet. The ratios are a little different. The brick and mortar, we tend to go no higher than 20 to 1 from a associate to supervisor ratio. With our remote team, we try to keep it around 14 or 15. And one thing I forgot to mention, the one thing that we've done that we felt was important from a troubleshooting perspective is we do have a centralized place for our remote workers to call in for troubleshooting support, which is a different process than what we use internally for our brick and mortar associates.
Great. Thanks for your perspective on that. So before we get into the Q&A, just got a couple minutes. Wanted to walk through, kind of put you guys on the spot. I'm going to ask each of you one thing you wish you knew before launching your remote working initiative that you could share with the group today. So why don't we start with Felix?
Sure. Yeah, I thought about this one a bit, and I think it's the sort of the level of myth-busterness that would be required, meaning the level of preconceived notion of what work at home was throughout the industry and across many brands. And so it was interesting to see as we launched, we've sort of always been on the more aggressive end of the delivery model, lots of security, lots of enablement, broad footprint. But it's interesting to see how many in the industry have a very specific niche idea of what it should be. And in some cases, it's overflow capacity for a physical center, or it's only the seasonal solution for the brand, or in other cases, it's just a way to get the same exact offering at a cheaper price. And the reality is that I think it takes a ton of education to talk to each brand about what their desired outcomes are to find out what's the right model for them at any point in time. So I think from my perspective, it's, how much education was required, broadly speaking, across so many different verticals in the industry.
Great, thanks for sharing. Doug, putting you on the spot, would you mind letting us know?
Yeah, Manny. I think when I first started in work at home, one of the biggest learnings for me was the level of effort required to make sure that your workers are included in the company and the culture and the feel, and that your culture extends out to those home workers that are sitting in a home office somewhere, maybe hundreds of miles from your location, and making sure they don't feel isolated, that they're feeling part of your organization. So learning that we had to look seriously at how we engage with each other, how we build trust with those employees, how we make sure that their needs are met every day so that they can focus their effort and attention on doing the best thing for the customer on the phone or in email or in a transaction. So when people are in the office, we interact with everyone casually, right? You can see if someone's having a bad day, if they're upset or they're excited about something. It's a little bit harder with at home, and you actually need to make sure that that connection is there so that those people have that same experience. So that was my biggest learning.
Thank you. Chris, let's end it with you.
Yeah, it's really hard to top what Doug and Felix just laid out there, because I agree with both of them. But I would add on, for us, it was the profile of the associate that we were looking to hire. You know, we went through many iterations of this, and originally started with looking for people that had previous work from home experience, which I think was a misstep. Sometimes work from home experience, depending on what type of job it was, didn't make them the right fit for Hyatt. And I know we all have different things that we put out there from an expectations perspective on who we're looking to hire. But I think the challenge of really building the right profile of the work from home associate that we were looking for was something that I wish I would have liked to know more about or lean into a little more prior to kicking it off.
Great. Thanks very much, you guys, for sharing those thoughts with the group today. So I'm going to turn this back over to Kayla. Appreciate everyone's time on the panel. And Kayla, why don't you take it away?
You bet, Manny. We've just got a couple minutes left, and we're certainly going to take a few questions in the remaining period that we've got here. Frankly, we've got too many to address all of them, so we're going to do the very best that we can, and we'll make sure to reach out to those folks with questions on a one-to-one basis to address those things if we don't get to you. Before we do that, we wanted to just remind everybody again that we will be sending out a copy of today's webinar, a full recording, so that you can listen to these nuggets again, perhaps share with colleagues or others on your team. Also wanted to let you know we've got a few specific resources within the area of remote working that can be really valuable to you and your organization. There are a few upcoming events that we wanted to make people aware of. It's a remote working strategies series of workshops, and these are hosted by Addition partner Customer Contact Strategies. It's an organization run by a friend of the family here at Digion. Her name is Michelle Rowan, and very targeted, very concentrated events and educational workshops that are focused solely on the area of remote working. I think a lot of the folks that we've spoken to and our panelists here today have attended them in the past and found them highly valuable. So wanted to let you know that there's one coming up here in Denver in mid-July, and then a couple actually in Laguna Beach, California in the fall. So we've actually got a discount code if you're interested in registering, and happy to share more information on that, as well as some different resources that we've got: case studies, ebooks, tech papers, infographics, and a variety of other things that can be useful to you and your teams, regardless of really where you're at in the life cycle of a remote working program. So again, really want to thank our panelists for sharing a bit of their knowledge today, and we've got a few questions here that we're going to try and tackle. Doug, we're going to start with you. We've got an attendee who's curious: for your BYOD employees, is there compensation to them for the device? Are you providing any type of stipend? How do you handle that at Concentrix?
Yeah, we don't have compensation for that device. In our experience, that most of the people that are looking for a work-at-home job, they have fairly modern technology that meets our requirements. So there's not too many times where they don't have what we already need. We're going to require them to bring a couple of things and a bring your own device model. We require them to bring the PC that meets our specifications. We're going to require them to have an internet connection that meets our specifications. But like Felix said, it's not too many that we're rejecting those anymore, because the home PC and the home internet connections today often exceed what we require, or what our client requires. The only other thing we need them to bring is really a quality noise canceling headset. And so if they need to go buy something, it's usually that, and it's usually 30, 40 bucks, and they're ready to work for us.
Absolutely. Okay, and another question that's a nice follow-on to that, Doug, and maybe you can address this as well while I've got you, is, what are you seeing in terms of the younger generation of employees, Generation Z, that, are you seeing any trends in terms of them not having traditional laptops or devices? Is there an increase that you're seeing maybe in tablets or other alternatives in your BYOD population?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and something that we're planning for now. We're starting to see a little bit more of it, but not nearly as much as you might think. So most of our employees are not the the young 20s and are working off their cell phones. We have a little bit more mature end user population, employee population, and our requirements are pretty strict, and it's a pretty standard PC requirement. So we're not equipped right now, and I don't think our clients' tools are necessarily equipped right now to support a lot of tablets and mobile devices. But certainly we recognize that's probably in our future, and we're thinking about how we're going to address that.
Absolutely. Definitely a trend that's probably upcoming within the space, and something to keep an eye out for. Just quickly here, Felix, I've got one for you. We've got an attendee that's wondering if your supervisors manage both. Well, actually, we might need to go back to you, Doug. Wondering if supervisors manage a mix of in-house and remote teams. Thoughts on that, Chris, perhaps?
Yeah, I can take that. We separated, so we do not have supervisors managing both in-house and remote associates. Because of the more, I'll call it intense, or the need to be in contact with your remote staff a lot more often than necessarily your in-house, because you have that visibility and they walk by your desk and you see them. That's why we have the different ratios, but we do also split it from a leadership perspective. We don't cross over from an in-house manager to a manager that's responsible for remote.
Okay, thank you so much. That partitioning sounds like a definite best practice to keep in mind. We're right at time. Felix, I've got one closing question for you, and then we are going to wrap up today. Obviously, a lot of differentiators in terms of the reasons to justify a work-at-home approach from an organizational perspective, or even for a BPO like yourself. Are you seeing that competition drive down to the recruitment level in terms of, seeking out new agents for your workforce, and how are you thinking about that, and what are you seeing in that recruitment process?
No, not really. I think, when you consider that you have an almost unlimited candidate pool, if you're operating coast to coast, there's still a lot of available capacity or latent capacity, certainly enough for everyone that's in the virtual space. I think the larger impact is what happens sort of at the micro level. There are trends that tend to occur throughout the US, like fracking in the Midwest and Walmart and sort of Walmart and the fast food places increasing labor rates at materially higher rates in major areas. And so we see, I think, that as a bigger impact. We don't particularly aim to recruit in major metros. So by definition, because we're a bit more in sort of rural areas, we haven't seen a major impact. You do tend to see a little bit of difficulty when you're recruiting the highly specialized, because we are at full employment in the US. And so that just means that availability of candidates in general is going to be a tad lower. So I think that that's less about the competition and more about the health of the economy.
Okay, great considerations there, and we are a few minutes over time. I will let everybody know we didn't even come close to answering all of the questions. So apologies that we've run out of time here today. I'm not surprised, to be honest, based on the expertise and the quality of our panelists here today. I want to thank all three of you for joining us, and really can't thank you enough for sharing your perspectives, sharing some of the wins and best practices that you've seen within your organizations, as well as some of the challenges. I mean, clearly the remote working space is something that has become fine-tuned and improved over time, and definitely some upcoming challenges that we've discussed here on today's webinar. So again, thank you, Doug, Felix, and Chris for joining us today. Manny, thanks for moderating. Want to remind everyone we will be sending out that recording, and for those of you who had questions we didn't get a chance to address, we'll be reaching out to you on a one-to-one basis and doing our very best to get you some resources and some answers that you're looking for. Thank you again, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carla.